Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Closet Podcast. I am not in my closet today because we are doing an overhaul clean out and it's a terrible situation in there. Still, thanks for being here. Today, I have Dr. Lee with us, who was a former DEI professor at De Anza College and actually became a victim of the whole DEI complex. And I want to get into her story, of course, but also I want to get into what led her into becoming a DEI professor and definitely why DEI has been really responsible, in my opinion, for all of the anti-Semitism on campus. And then I am going to actually surprise you and her with an alternative to DEI, which I am going to publish this week, and I want to get her thoughts on it. Dr. Lee, welcome to the Closet Podcast, and I would love it if you would. I already know your story, but why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your background and kind of what set you up to be really a great option for leading DEI on campus.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the opportunity to join you. And I'm glad that you're out of the closet for a little bit here, Sheila. That's always nice, but I understand transitional moments as well. But I'm a lifelong educator. I have been teaching for as long as I've been going to school. I often, kind of joke around with people about because I was like a peer tutor in my elementary school days. And I was always under the teacher's foot and wanting to like be close to educators. So but then I of course got my formal education, and I moved from Northern California to Southern California
Mhm.
to become a teacher, and I taught for 10 years in East Los Angeles public middle schools. I taught honors English, civics, and social studies, and the civics program was a class that I had actually designed, because I did research for my master's program on civic competency. And what I found was that, and this is, in the 90s, teachers and students had low levels of civic competency at that time, and it's a problem that persists till today. So I designed a civic education program, and made a lot of impact on students. So we actually got some recognition from the Los Angeles Unified School District Board of Education for the positive impact on student and community lives. And at the same time that I was teaching, I was also serving as a professional development organizer. So I'm always someone who, when I find new things or ways to improve teaching as a craft, I like to share it with my colleagues. So I always consider myself like a co-learner and always looking for that next, step to, greater inclusion in classrooms so that every student feels like, their needs are being met, and that instruction is being individualized to them. And
I was
so
actually
after,
reading
Mhm.
about how you started, and it really hit home for me because I came from Iran when I was 7. I didn't speak any English. And I know that you were helping people understand gifted education and that maybe English wasn't your first language doesn't mean you're not gifted. And I actually went through that. I was in one school where I was in ESL. I had to learn English when I came to America. And I actually approached one of my teachers to be in the, GATE, the Gifted and Talented Education Program, and she said no. And maybe it was because my language skills weren't, up to par. And my family ended up moving, went to another school in the same district. And immediately I was put into that course. So when I heard that you were actually championing that, it really hit home for me. But can I ask you a question though? In the civics course that you created, what were you teaching? What does that mean?
So, basic civic knowledge were some of the constructs. So, what we found was that students couldn't even identify, who the mayor was, who the governor was of the state, as well as inquiry-based approaches. We did several community panels around, topics that the students chose. At that time, we had things like HR 4437, anti-immigration policies here in California. We had the English-only policies in action. We had also policies around sex education and curriculum. Students wanted to talk about this with their community members. We arranged voter registration drives.
Hmm.
And so, the community members who were eligible to register to vote, the students were encouraging them to do so and to become politically involved, and they're, engaging in that responsibility and duty of every student to every citizen, sorry, to be involved in the civic process. And so everything, that is focused on engagement, awareness, and how do I engage as an informed citizen, and really help my community to be a better place by engaging in the civic process.
Amazing. I would say I was definitely a late adapter to that, but I think it's necessary for every school. Okay, I interrupted you. Keep going.
Yes, no, I think it's important for everyone to have that kind of foundational understanding of their rights and responsibilities, because without that, we get into a world like we see now, where people are out being activists, without having any understanding of what they're activating for, as well as people not understanding, like even the three branches of government and how do they work together or not. And what are our responsibilities as citizens to hold them accountable? And when we don't know what we should be doing, it's hard to do what we should be doing. So that's why I was just so thankful to have the opportunity to help middle school students to get that as a foundation. And some of my former students have actually connected with me on LinkedIn
Hmm.
in recent times because I've been in the news, and they're like they've come back and told me the impact that that had, and continues to impact their trajectory. So yeah, so moving fast forwarding, I got my doctorate in education and educational leadership and administration. But again, I've always been a teacher leader, so that was my intention for that. And my dissertation focused on teacher leadership as well. So after I got my doctorate, I went outside of the U.S. for the first time. I traveled all around the U.S., but never been beyond. And I had
Hmm.
all these things on my bucket list after teaching world history, at middle school for so many years. And I got to hit many of the places that I always wanted to go to and that I had taught about, like Egypt and others. And so I was able to do that. And I did some volunteer teaching in the post-Soviet Republic of Georgia during that time, which was just an amazing experience as
Wow.
well. And then came back stateside and continued that job search that went on for a long time, did some adjunct teaching in teacher education programs. So I was teaching in what's known as a master's in TESOL, so teaching English to speakers of other languages. This has just always been a passion for me. And I was, helping graduate students who were, looking to improve their craft around that to do that, focusing on methodologies and linguistics and pragmatics and other topics like that for them.
Amazing.
And
So
fast
what,
forward
yeah,
to
fast forward. I want to hear all about.
2021, yes. I finally landed a temporary full-time position
Mhm.
at a community college, and that was for 1 year. But that was kind of like it opens a door for you once you finally get in, to that first one. And then after that temporary one ended, the 1 year position, I was job searching again, looking in community college system. Because something I didn't say, Sheila,
Mhm.
I was a community college student during
Right.
out my whole, educational journey. During middle school, started taking classes at my local community college, and I actually
Wow.
accelerated my graduation by 2 years by getting that enough credits to do that. So I had really benefited from community college, and so when I was able to, start teaching at that level, I was just thrilled because that aligns with my mission, who I am as an educator, all the things I had done, up to that point. So I saw this position for a faculty director for
Hmm.
the Office of Equity, Social Justice, and Multicultural Education.
Wow.
Yes, and it was at De Anza College, like longest title I'd ever seen in a job posting,
Mhm.
but it was exciting because those three topics were topics that I had always worked in and, helped people to better understand. And for this to be it was a faculty director, I was still a faculty member, not like a paper pusher or an administrator, nothing
Mhm.
against administrators, but like I'm someone, I'm active, like I can't
You're a
sit behind
doer.
a
Yeah.
desk. Yeah, like I really can't like be like, oh, let's sign some paper, like
Yeah.
I have to be doing something.
Mhm.
So so I went through a rigorous process. There was like multiple panel interviews. I had to do teaching demonstrations. And I was doing everything to assure them that I was the right person for the job. And I was surprised when, I got the call saying they were welcoming me on.
Mhm.
So that's what led me to the ends of my journey to that, and I made a lot of sacrifice, for that position. And to have things play out the way that they did almost from the beginning was just heartbreaking for me.
Yeah, so I was listening that you started, as anyone should do, by gaining feedback from faculty and students and doing some of those interviews to see kind of where the needs were. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that went?
Yeah, so I did over 60 hours of needs assessment conversations, and it was with faculty and senior leadership,
Mm,
not with the students at that point because we were all online, and this was during the pandemic.
got it.
So I didn't have any connections with students when I first came in the door, but I did have access to a faculty list and a senior leadership list of emails, and I don't think I would have been able to do 60 hours if we weren't all online and
Right.
kind of just stuck on our computers. But it was very informative. Some of the things that people raised about what had happened in the past around the topics of equity, social justice, and multicultural education. People feeling like those were words that people used, but they were all meaning different things by it. People feeling like even diversity and equity and inclusion, like all of those things were being defined in different ways. And so there was this feeling of disconnect between people, departments, individuals, and the leadership. So one of the first things I did was I developed these workshops for defining these terms, and so people could come together and talk and share. And that was from my needs assessment conversations. So everything that I ended up, doing or attempting to do was rooted in those initial needs assessment conversations. And unfortunately, Sheila, not only were my initial activities related to that, but the environment that I worked in also was rooted in some of those initial conversations. And I say that because like the first 2 weeks in, one of the first people I contacted was one of my staff members in the office. Because I wanted to hear from the staff first, right? What are our needs and so forth. And
Mhm.
as I sat down to talk with this person, they advised me that they were a finalist for my position that I had just, come into. And they said, I don't know who you are or what your commitment to equity is, but I'm a former student here. And, basically this role should be mine. I don't know why they selected you over me. And they told me at the close of the meeting that I would have a very rough ride ahead of me.
Didn't that
Um,
just make you feel so included, so inclusive?
it was like, oh, okay, that is very interesting. And what
Mhm.
I'm someone who I understand how it feels to not have a position come through. Because as I mentioned to you, I had that temporary position the year before. And I had just gone through the experience of I did everything that a tenure track professor would do. I had a portfolio and everything. It
Mhm.
was pending budget approval. Well, the budget approval didn't happen, and that's why that position closed. And I was like out on the search again. So I
Mhm.
shared that with this person, and I said, I understand you completely. As I literally just went through something similar where I thought for sure I was
Mhm.
in, and then I wasn't, and it was, and it shifted everything for me. So I said, I want to make sure that I work with you and that we work together, and that what I'm doing as director is going to just uplift what you're attempting to do here. And that
Mhm.
was rejected. That was rejected, and I was told that I would have a rough ride ahead. And that person then delivered on the rough ride a few weeks later, in a team meeting where they called me a white supremacist and told me that I was white speaking and white splaining.
So now I know that you grew up in an area that actually had white supremacists. So just walk us through what you said to elicit such a response and how that felt, knowing that you actually went through white supremacy.
Yes. So, in our team meetings initially, again, I don't like to come in and think I have like the solution or the magic bullet. Like I really come in like as a learner. So I had gone through like multiple team meetings by the point that this I call it a shifting event happened.
Mhm.
And the meetings were like casual, like we would chat, we would do a meditation, We would say acknowledgments. They would say conocimientos. That's what they would call them. And we would do things like that where it was like catching up with each other, how's life, this and that. And this went on for like multiple times. And my job was to do strategic planning and to promote inclusion on the campus. That was in my job description and what I understood it to be. So I had to get a structure, going in. And so after a few of these, like just very casual, meetings where we're just chatting and so forth, I developed a Google document and I made it so we could all edit it. And at the beginning of the meeting, after we did all the very relation building things, I said, hey, I made this Google Doc. And I made it so we can all edit it, so we can start, setting agendas for our meetings. Because I asked them, what do you use for your process? Do you guys take notes or not? And they were like, oh, no, we just meet weekly and we talk and we do things. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I wanted to start documenting what we were doing because we're at a public institution. And I feel like there's a duty to document, make transparent what you're doing with public dollars. And so I suggested that, and I said we could all edit it. I said, I'm new here, so I know you guys maybe do workshops and things that, are kind of on a schedule. I'd like to start seeing that, and you can tell me where you want me to support or how I can fit into those, or, and I'll be making some things and I can put my things in there and we can just like start kind of planning in this doc. And as I was doing that, that's when the person that told me I would have the rough ride said, stop what you're doing. And I was like, oh, I thought something happened or something. Everyone had these serious looks, in the Zoom boxes. And he goes, what you're doing right now is you're white speaking, you're white splaining, and you're supporting white supremacy. And we're not into that here. And I was like,
by trying to accomplish something, or is the Google Doc the offensive thing? What triggered that?
So I didn't know until weeks later. But what I did do when that happened, I said, I said, excuse me. I said, I have not come in here calling anyone names. Like I've not called anyone names. I have made judgment on anyone or anything that you do. And I said, I feel like you're making a judgment on me. And what you just said is very hurtful to me. And I explained to them where I come from, what I had actually experienced, growing up in the Central Valley of California, when I did, and maybe it's changed now, but when I grew up there, it was very different in Lodi, California. And so I said, I don't think we should be calling each other names or doing any of that kind of behavior to each other. I'm very uncomfortable by what you have just said.
Right.
And everyone on the call, Sheila, started looking like what I was saying was offensive and like I was harming the person who said those bizarre and hurtful things to me. And so there wasn't a response to that. Everyone just like kind of looked like, oh well, and the person who said that said, that's just, we don't do that here. So many weeks later, I had seen that individual and others, including my supervising dean, hold workshops where they would put up this graphic that had like poison bottles on it. And it said, do not drink this and do not, or something like that at the bottom. This is poison, it's toxic. And at the top it said white supremacy culture characteristics. It had things like being on time, being objective, setting agenda, worship of the written word, all these other things. And one time it had a citation because I had never seen that graphic. I'd seen many graphics for this, but I hadn't seen that one either. And I went to I went, typed and Googled, and I found it was Tima Okun and Kenneth Jones. They have a thing called Dismantling Racism Workshop. It was a white paper. And I read it. And I saw the graphic that they kept holding up as, like what we need to resist. We should all be working against this. And when I read the document, I realized that what they were doing was weaponizing this white supremacy culture characteristics, which are like personality traits, against me, because I was using the Google Doc to set an agenda and and to try to like start strategic planning. I don't know of another way to do that than to start documenting and making a timeline and, all the things I've done around strategic planning prior to that at other institutions. And so I realized that what they were saying was that I was embodying that by even having the Google Doc or trying to set a structure, or trying to engage in strategic planning. And that they had furthermore expectations of me as what they call a BIPOC person. That means Black, Indigenous, people of color, because that term kept coming up in their workshops. They had expectations of me that I would be intellectually sloppy, that I wouldn't read, that I wouldn't be on time, that I wouldn't do any of the things that were in those poison bottles. And when that clicked, I was even more offended by what was said. And, I did go to my supervising dean because I had no supervising capacity. I'm a faculty
Right.
member, keep in
Right.
mind, right? And I told them about what happened, and I asked them for assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And the assistance that was offered, I asked them for assistance with the team. I said, we need some intercultural communication training, in-group bias training, how to speak to each other respectfully, and nonviolent communication. I made like several, recommendations, and the dean's response was they didn't think that I understood what the person was saying. They think it was all a misunderstanding. And the
Mm.
dean said, "I'll have the person apologize to you." And I said, "Okay, so are we going to get someone in to bring us together, talk about ways to speak to each other in a professional manner?" The dean said, "No, we're not going to do that." And I was like, "Okay, then if we're not going to do that, which is highly needed, I'm telling you, I see a need for it. I have a lot of experience with leading conversations like that, but I can't because I'm the person being attacked here."
Mm-hmm.
So I said, "I want you to come to the meetings then, so that you can maintain an environment of civil discourse, because there isn't one right now. And I feel very uncomfortable being called a white supremacist by people, and
Mm-hmm.
told I'm white speaking and white splaining." So the dean started to come, but they didn't provide an environment of civil discourse. Instead, they became the ringleader for this action. The person never apologized to me. In fact, they stopped talking to me completely, and just like had nothing. It was like I was a non-person,
Mm.
even though I was the director of the office. And the dean became the ringleader for harassment and bullying. Every week was like a gang up a bullying. Anytime I suggested something that was actually about inclusion, and that was based on the needs assessment conversations and presentations that were made to us as a group, it was like, "No, we don't do that. We're not going to do that. Yeah, we're not focused on that." And
Before
nothing
we move
moved.
on to that, Lee, though, I want to ask you, what was the point of this department? Is it just like a checkbox so they say that they have a DEI department? Like what did they want you to do?
Yeah, so my job description said I should lead a transformation around the topics of equity, social justice, and multicultural education. I should promote inclusion. Those were things that were initially, identified to me by the supervising dean. And they were also from the chancellor's office. There was a anti-racist mandate from the office, and all of the schools were kind of scrambling to get on board with that because it was a demand made. So the chancellor of the California Community College system, 115 colleges,
Mhm.
made this mandate that we will all do anti-racist engagement and promotion on campuses. They didn't define that. There was a California Academic Senate paper that came out that cited people like Ibram Kendi and others, but they were never clear. What does it mean? How will it look? What are we expected to do? We just are all going to pledge to it, and then what? So that they were in those early stages of what do we do with this,
Mhm.
including our teacher union, because I was a faculty member, and so I was involved immediately with my teacher union because as a faculty member, that's what I've always done. And even they were scrambling. They're like, "The chancellor has said this. We've got to like get on board. We need a training of some sort for our union." And I was tasked with finding a training for the union for
Got
that.
it. So, by these meetings where they came in and kind of chit-chatted and every week and how's it going with your dog and all that
Yeah.
stuff, like how is that fulfilling a mandate? And then how does the dean justify the salaries of the people who are doing that? That's what I'm saying. Like, what was it that the dean paying the salaries and hiring for these positions was expecting to be accomplished by just chit-chatting at meetings? Like, I'm trying to just
Yeah.
really what was
You
expected at the dean's level, maybe.
I was that really I had a lot of questions around that too, Sheila, and I asked those questions, and that's part of what got me in trouble.
Mhm.
Because we had this group called the Equity Action Council on campus. And again, this is a group that was meeting every week. We would start off with, welcomes, a meditation, conocimientos. There was this constant use of Spanish. And truly that's another expression of in-group bias, because it assumes that everyone knows what you're saying, and it alienates everyone else who doesn't speak that language. And this is a public institution where English is the language of the state of California. But there was this constant use of that, and we were to call our dean Hefa. And Hefa in Black English vernacular, it means like little cow. And it's sometimes a substitution for the B word. So when I heard people say like Hefa this, Hefa that, I was like, ooh. And I even told them,
You're right.
I said
Spelled
in Black,
differently, but pronounced
yeah.
the same. Yes.
And I would hear I told them, I said, I would hear my auntie say that. She would be like, tell that heifer to sit down and be quiet. Like
Oh
that's how
my
this is used, And I said, so I'm not comfortable calling our dean that. I'm just going to call her first name. So again, it was like I was not, in the team, because I wasn't engaging in these weird terms. Now I found out what it actually means, and I had never heard this used. And remember, I worked in East Los Angeles, which is 99% Spanish speaking. And so I'd never heard, and we never called any of our principals Hefa or anything like that. But it means like boss lady.
Female boss.
Yes. And it creates this environment of a boss lady, like a gang that salutes to their boss lady. And I wasn't on board for many reasons, and it just felt uncomfortable. So at the Equity Action Council, that's how the meetings flowed. People would refer to our dean as Hefa. We would do these conocimientos, which is like, acknowledgements. Yes. And we would say like, who's done something this week? What did you do? How are you advancing equity? But we were never speaking about strategic planning, about, anything like that. And I started to point that out, like, what is the purpose of this group? Why are we meeting for 2 hours? Like, and for me, I'm a new director, and I had all these people wanting to talk to me and stuff. And like, this is a chunk of my time, and I'm having to be there because my dean leads it, So I started to ask those questions, and they were very upset with me for doing that. What they were doing was fine. They had been doing this for years. And I was saying, like, I really want to maximize my time and use it wisely, and I feel like this is not productive. And so I started to bring in and ask community partners and guests to come in and speak about what are the equity needs on this campus. People I had contacted and been in contact with through my needs assessment. And I brought those people in, and the response to that, again, was they were upset that I was doing things like that. I wanted the Equity Action Council to do some action on campus. That's all, action towards greater inclusion. And the speakers were not well received. The things that they suggested were not well received.
Give us some examples of that, please.
Some example. Okay. So one of the groups that I had contacted early on in the needs assessment conversation was multiple faculty members and staff members who shared with me that they had concerns about anti-Semitism on our campus. And they gave me like many examples and so forth. Things that had happened before I got there, but they were able to link me to like news articles, student government agendas and action items, and things like that. And they felt like, and they also point out that our school no longer had a Jewish student club because the environment had just become so hostile towards them. And, resolutions that the Jewish student club had tried to advance through their student government bodies ended up with them being attacked. They were attacked. They were shouted down. People chanted things like "from the rivers to the sea." Now everyone knows that, but this is before, the recent news where that became a slogan that a lot of American people know. They didn't know it at that time. And they were shouted down. And instead of adopting a resolution to define anti-Semitism for the campus, like the Jewish students were seeking to do, they ended up adopting a resolution to condemn Israel, which was weird and not even connected. Yeah. And so it was this environment, and these meetings were apparently very taxing emotionally for the students. And this was all shared with me. And so I said, you know what, Equity Action Council needs to hear this. So we brought guests, they spoke about it. They said, we've tried to work here before, with the groups, haven't made much progress. We're so excited with the new director. We've written some recommendations for you. So they gave us written recommendations. They wanted us to stop starting our academic calendar on high holy Jewish holidays. This had been a practice for like decades at De Anza. And unfortunately, even this past year when I was terminated, they again started on a high Jewish holy holiday. After everything that we raised awareness and had meetings with multiple people from the union, from administration, we made a multi-faith calendar so no one could say, we just don't know when it is. It moves around. That was one of the excuses.
Right.
And so, we made all of those things and resources, and still, again, that took place. And one of the primary people who helped advocate with me was also terminated. And so there's this environment there that was brought to our attention. We were asked to act. When I took it back to my team meeting, because the Equity Action Council said, you guys could deal with it in the equity office.
Hmm.
And took it back to the team. And I said, well, what are we going to do? And my supervising dean said we would do nothing. And I said, well, how can we do nothing when everything that you just, heard and what's been experienced by the people, that's documented. And I was told that I wasn't there. I didn't see those things. That may not have been what took place. And I said, well, what about this article? What about the student testimonies that have been seen on video? The students saying that. And I was told, that we were not going to focus on that, that our focus was on decentering whiteness. The Jews are white oppressors. And, when I was told that, I was baffled. Like I felt like I was in a twilight zone because Jews are white oppressors. I said, what about the richness of the Jewish diaspora? The many different groups of ethnically minoritized Jewish people. How are you categorizing them as white oppressors? It doesn't even match with the data. And I was not explained about what they meant by that. I asked, where are you getting this framework from? Where are you even getting this idea that Jews are white oppressors? I've never heard that in my life. Show me something that I can go by and look at. It was not provided to me. The same person, my supervising dean, also told me, we've got recommendations from CARE, which is the Council on Islamic Relations. And we didn't do those either. And I said, please show me those recommendations. I want to see anyone who's feeling like they are not welcome on the campus and there's no space for them to be their authentic selves. I want to help that community. And I was never shown the recommendations from CARE. So often what the pattern was, I would ask for information or documentation. It would not be provided to me. Throughout, Sheila, I'm the director.
Yeah.
I never saw my office budget. And I asked to see it. I said, I want to know how the funds are being spent. These are public funds. I'm the director. I'm supposed to be overseeing this office. And I was told it was none of my concern how the funds are being spent. I had no right to see them. I shouldn't, I had no access to them. Only the staff members and the dean had access to my office budget. So the whole 2 years, I never saw it. I never had approval for items until I just kept making complaints and saying like, hey, I need money to do, programming and things that I'd like to do here over and over again. Then I started filing grievances. And then there was this like really obtuse budget approval process that only I was subjected to. And I would submit everything. And then I would be told, oh, well, this needs that or this needs this. Like it was the hardest approval process that any other faculty member had to go through. So I was targeted that way. And I just went to people and started going beyond budget and saying like, hey, I don't have a budget. I'm a community college person. And I
Right.
had people kind enough to come in and still talk.
Oh my gosh. So do you think this is how it is most places? Like after speaking to your, DEI colleagues, is this kind of a one-off, or do you think this is kind of the norm?
So after I was terminated, and then all the media attention, happened, which was unanticipated, but I'm thankful because I'm able to shine a light, and let people be aware. The number of people who have contacted me, not just California, but like nationwide, I've had contact from tenured faculty. So I was thinking if I had just gotten my tenure, none of this would have happened. Maybe I should have just, like some of my mentors said, just be quiet, wait the 4 years and then you start trying to make change. And I'm like, okay, what? No, that's how I would tell them back, like, that's how you get trapped in the status quo because you come in doing that and not being your real self. And if you're supposed to lead a transformation, you can't wait 4 years while you're sitting back and just going, oh, okay, to people
Mhm.
and not pushing back or asking any questions. So I've got contact from tenure track people, tenured people, librarians, um, actual reverends and religious oriented people who like their congregations have adopted like strange policies that were never in place before. And they speak about it and they can't because they're the leader. And so they just have to go along, they felt with it. So, I've gotten contact from so many people. This is happening in so many places. And often there's a shame associated with it and a shaming and a shunning that takes place if you're the person asking the question. Isolation from people that they had known for years. Like I've been told this story many times with people like people I've known for a long time who won't talk to me anymore just because I, asked a question or didn't go along with something. So there's this environment in certain, I'm not saying it's every DEI space or every time DEI is there or, every time social justice is addressed. I'm not saying that at all, but it's a prevalent and dominant ironically approach that's being unnamed. And it's funny because they claim they're speaking against the dominance and the hegemony and all that, but they are that at the moment.
That's how I feel too. I feel like diversity does excluded diversity of thought and the ability to ask questions, especially in educational places where you're supposed to ask questions. That's the whole point, is to have discourse and question things and be in the dorm at 2 a.m. and hash it out. Like that's the whole point, especially of a university. Otherwise, what's the point of university if you can't meet people from different walks of life who have different opinions and lenses through which they see the world and that discourse? That's the whole point of college, right? So that's the diversity. Inclusion, it's definitely excluded Jews, I'll tell you that. So it's been actually exclusive, right? And so what's the other one? Diversity, and equity. Equity, it's like, there should be equal opportunity, but there shouldn't be a guarantee that you're all going to end up in the same place. Otherwise, it goes against human nature. Human nature, you want to struggle for something. You want to work hard and have a difference in outcome from somebody who's sitting on their couch all day. Otherwise, everyone's going to sit on their couch all day. So how does a country advance? How does technology and innovation advance if everyone's going to end up at the same place? I mean, we've seen it over and over again in other societies who have failed miserably, who have attempted this. But what I hear a lot is, oh, they did it the wrong way. We're doing it the right way. So what are your thoughts? Do you think that DEI is something that can be worked with, or do you think it needs to be completely dismantled and replaced by something else?
That is a really tough question, Sheila. You're good at these really tough questions.
It makes the podcast better.
Yes, yes. You know, it's a sticky question because when I hear I actually have talked to people and they say like DEI must DIE, like they're committed to that and we're going to get rid of it everywhere, kind of thing. And I think in some states and spaces that may work, but others are going to hold on. They've implemented it into their, legislative bodies, some places into their ed code, in education spaces like California, where we have ethnic studies requirements here in the ed code now. And so it's a hard question. And I think what part of my work that I do is to try to get people to understand that there are different ways to do the work. And that was part of what got me into trouble at De Anza. I was told that by even saying that, I was leading people to danger, and I was wrong for saying and doing that. But I truly believe it. I believe that people need to understand when we talk about social justice, there's different ways and philosophies that can underlie social justice. So I've heard people say we should just get rid of social justice completely too, but it's like I don't know how feasible that will be. I think better is to understand the philosophies, understand that there's a critical social justice approach where the proponents of that are seeking exactly what you said earlier, equality of outcomes. And there's a classical social justice approach where proponents of that approach, what do they want for social justice for society? It's equality of opportunity. And, they are different approaches. I don't see any reason why they can't coexist. But unfortunately, the people who have advanced critical social justice refuse to make space for any other kind of way of looking at gender, race, or any of the topics. They only want people to see their worldview and only want students to be taught in that view. And if you're teaching from a more classical social justice perspective, they work overtime to get you out of your position, to get you canceled out of it, to get you shunned. And if you even talk about that there are these different ways, like I did, then you're especially dangerous because then you're getting people to think critically, and that's not welcome as well.
So before I get to my kind of idea for a replacement for DEI, because I think the mistake that a lot of people are making is what you just said, DEI must die, and they don't have a replacement or something to make people feel better. Like, oh, okay, this is a better alternative that actually isn't exclusionary and doesn't divide people. We'll get to that. But what I want to ask you first is, you know, I started when Black Lives Matter was happening and people were marching in the streets. I had a Black pastor on, and we were talking about how in the charter of Black Lives Matter, there was anti-Semitism and how you cannot claim bigotry and be bigoted at the same time. So, where do you think that fits into this? Because DEI has definitely 100%, I think, been responsible for the anti-Semitism that we are seeing on campuses and the acceptance of anti-Semitism and people mentally doing acrobatics to justify the rape of Israeli women, the murder of Israeli children, because they are white colonialist oppressors that should be killed. And this is what resistance looks like. So, can you just dive into that a little bit and how DEI has allowed women, feminists, to justify rape against Jews?
Yes, so I think the problem, and we're seeing it, and I'm glad that some of the mainstream news outlets have covered some of the pro-Hamas rallies and other things, because the problem is the ideology that's in place in too many places, and people not being transparent about it. The problem is a critical social justice ideology specifically that encourages people to view their neighbors, their colleagues, their peers as either victims or oppressors. It promotes a race binary. It promotes a gender identity ideology that's also incorporated into it. The founders of Black Lives Matter, they were happy to claim themselves and proclaim themselves as trained Marxist agitators and activists. That's well known in the history. And I think when people heard the slogan, they didn't look underneath to see what are the philosophies, what is being promoted, what is this group actually about? And if they did, they would have seen that, the founders were trained Marxist agitators, that they were committed to the destruction of the nuclear family, that they were committed to gender identity causes, committed to upholding race in every aspect, in every component of human relations and interaction. And they really need race as a construct for that whole system to work. And they also need gender identity as a construct for their whole system to work. And they are related and they are working in tandem throughout many of our institutions. We see it in the Black Lives Matter Global Foundation flags that we see administrators at my school having in their email signatures. This is on up to vice presidents and so forth in the senior leadership, not just deans. Wow. So as a faculty member, when you log into your email and you see Black Lives Matter, Global Foundation, is it a Black Lives Matter school or are we a California public school? I don't know, and it creates this environment where we all pledge allegiance to that flag. And that's unfortunate because there's the American flag. And that's what we should be pledging allegiance to in a public school. And we should have the right to also not say the pledge. Some people do not say the pledge. And that's part of American freedom. But the Black Lives Matter flag is not. And waving that and holding it up and waving the new Progress Pride flag and actually putting it up on your flag staffs at your public schools also is problematic. And that happens at places like De Anza Community College and others. And so we've had this complete capture of universities. In the medical field, we have groups like White Coats for Black Lives And they are on over 100 campuses throughout the nation where our medical and health professionals are being trained. And they're being told that their job is not to provide competent care, but to enact racial justice and to lay on the floor and participate in die-ins and for Palestine and all of these other things that are aligned with the mission of Black Lives Matter and their foundational, constructs. So the key we have in our public schools, Sheila, students who in state of California and others, they are going to be required to graduate an ethnic studies course. The ethnic studies course works from what's called a liberated ethnic studies model. And that model is a critical social justice framework. And the people who have advanced this in many areas, came out of activism from the 60s and 70s, they claim there's only one way to teach this. That's a liberated ethnic studies way. It's anti-Semitic. It brings in things like sexuality and sexual preference into ethnic studies. It's all a mess because it's a messy viewpoint that seeks to capture all of us and get us to obsess with race and identity, gender identity checkbox.
And that ethnic studies program also tried to remove Holocaust education. It was one of the first public speaking events that I did. So yeah, it's just terrible.
It is, and that's why I don't know if you know, but I'm serving as director of the Coalition for Empowered Education. And we are developing an alternative framework to the ethnic studies model. We have a lot of interest. It was focused on K through 12 when we started. We're a multi-ethnic coalition because that framework pretends that there's only 4 groups that have contributed to American history and society. And so our framework that we are developing, we're having a conference in May in Sacramento, California, for teachers, students, educators, lobbyists, everybody welcome who's interested. We really will be making and advancing that alternative framework, the Empowered Ethnic Studies framework. We will be focusing on American pluralism. We will be focusing on the many different groups that have contributed to American society, e pluribus unum, and other things that are so critical for us as a nation. We will not work from an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist, anti perspective of any sort. And so this is something that's going to be that people are looking forward to. And like I mentioned, we do have faculty members in the higher ed system because in the CSUs, California State Universities and University of California system, there's also ethnic studies, and it's from a liberated ethnic studies model, and they are desperately looking for alternatives. And we have some courageous folks who are willing to put forth curriculum review processes and courses that are going to be grounded in our framework. So I'm really thankful to be doing that work, a small piece.
No, it's not small. That's like the most important piece ever. So, and that actually segues really nicely into a suggestion that I'd like to make to you and get your feedback on. So instead of DEI, I came up with detail, diversity in thought and life experience. Nice. Diversity in thought, because as business people, I remember when I was in business school, they gave us a case study that there was a think tank near Stanford, somewhere in San Francisco, that they were going to build the best shopping cart in the whole entire world. And they said, we want diversity in the room. We want old people. We want young people. We want, people with degrees. We want people, with trades. We want like everything, because everyone has different needs from their shopping cart. Let's come up, like the shopping cart hasn't changed in decades. Let's come up with like the best shopping cart. So business people know that you want diversity of thought and life experience in the room if you're really trying to advance something. So what are your thoughts of that? Instead of DEI must die, what about detail must replace DEI? Because I'll give you another example. I'll give you one more. A professional Black basketball player's kid with 25 tutors going to the best private schools, should that kid get affirmative action just because of his skin color? Or imagine a single mother meth addict, white, that child going to the library every day on a free computer, watching free Khan Academy videos, elevating himself to a position where he's applying to the same schools that professional basketball player's kid is applying to. Is it about skin color or is it about life experience?
Yes, you definitely have an angle on there, Sheila, that is very promising. You know, and you're one of many people who is doing work to build, alternative frameworks in workplace environments. You know, I think the alternatives are key, and the sooner people learn about them, the better. I have contact with multiple people who are working in like corporate spaces. Some are working in education, like myself. I can't, I'm an educator, so I'm just,
Yeah, no, we
that's
all
my
have to do
lane,
our thing for sure. For sure.
So yes, I think and it's always wonderful, right? When you can have an awesome acronym to kind of like, use as the pillars of it. So
Yeah. Yeah, I just think it just pulls in everybody and it isn't excluding anyone. It's really, again, the whole point of life and making a better anything is by having diversity of thought in the room, from having those conversations, not walking on eggshells, being able to question something, all of the
Mhm,
things that you were vilified for
mhm,
were
mhm,
all of the things, the right things that we should all be going back to, and that
mhm,
really truly lead to inclusion and advancement in any field, whether it's business, education, relationships, friendships. It's all about that open and honest conversation and feeling comfortable. And I have to tell you, my parents didn't leave everything in Iran to escape on the back of a pickup truck to bring their two daughters to America for us to not have freedom of thought.
Absolutely. And those are the stories and experiences that are not captured in current models and frameworks. And it's important that we understand that all the diverse people, it's important too, I think, Sheila, that we understand America's relationship with race and gender and
Yeah,
how it's evolved over time. Because I meet people who are not from America, and they're like, wow, like you guys are really obsessed with this. Like it's not like that in my country, And I came here and people were telling me, like, I've talked to people from Africa, and they say like they're telling me I'm a black person, and that I should do this or that and be this way and vote this way or that way. And they're like, but I don't have that in my country. Like we don't even talk about things that way. So I think understanding how we became race and obsessed and gender identity obsessed is key. And I think students need to know that it didn't pop out of nowhere. This has happened over time. And there's ways to disconnect ourselves from the disconnect that we're doing with the divisive focus on these race and gender identity checkboxes. One
well,
thing
you
is
know what?
understanding
Go ahead, keep going. Sorry.
that yes, sorry, you got me on a roll.
Yeah,
But one thing I'll wrap it with that. But it's
yeah.
one thing is understanding that there are different ways to view race and that there are different ideologies of race as well as different ideologies of gender and gender identity. And where did gender even come from into the lexicon?
Mhm.
So having students understand that and having an educational program like our framework will suggest is key to understand where we got to where we are. What is the complex and schizophrenic relation with race in America? How different groups were white, black, not black, over time, and how those census designations have changed. Carlos Hoyt talks a lot about this. And bringing in scholars like that, who students may have never heard of and would never hear of if they're just ensconced in a critical social justice ideology framework, is key. And for me, I didn't. So you're talking about an educator who's been in DEI 40 years, right? My whole career. Until I worked at De Anza, I had never heard that there were different philosophies of race and that there were different ways of viewing race and interacting with it. None of my mentors, my doctorate, like I'd like to think like I read a lot and everything. I had never heard of it, never encountered it. It was Dr. Sheena Mason's work on the theory of racelessness, which even opened my eyes that there's different ways to see this. And then, of course, I'm going to share that with others. And I was condemned for doing that and for bringing her as a guest speaker to talk to us about that. So I just think it's important for students to know. And when I did my workshops with students on race ideologies, they were like, thank you. Like nobody ever told us this. And we've been literally taught to view race only one way. And you've shown us that there's other ways. So I think that diversity of thought, that's what college is about. That's what
Yeah,
like we go there for. So
it's so funny. I have a junior, and she's thinking about colleges now, my oldest. And she's like, I want to go to this and that campus and fight. And like, I'm not paying tuition for you to go fight. I'm paying tuition for you to go learn.
Yeah.
If you're gonna go fight, they should be paying me. Like, so these conversations are very eminent, and very real. And they're not just these like, abstract, how do we, whatever. This is very, very real. And so I'm sitting ruminating on these things because we literally have like 6 months, 7 months to decide, the future of our children. And you're right. That was one of my favorite things in college, was to just talk to people who came from, the foreign students, and students from different parts of America that I'd never visited, and just learning about how they grew up and how they see the world and what shapes their decision-making process. I mean, that was the best part. And I went to Columbia. And look at Columbia now. I mean, it's like literally they sent me a donation thing, and I wrote "Protect Your Jewish Students" with a black Sharpie and sent it back to them. Yeah, I'm so disappointed. I've been calling it out for years, and I think they thought I was crazy, and now they're seeing that no, this is actually a really big, big problem. So, Dr. Lee, thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours and hours, and I'm sure our paths will cross many, many more times again. I so appreciate you coming on, and your honesty and your work and your commitment and your passion is palpable. And the fact that it's just so evident that everything you do comes from a place of love and good intention and wanting to make the world a better place and wanting to make the education system a better place. I cannot wait to hear about your progress in May and what comes out of that super important summit, really, to guide the future of our children's education and to create a better place for everyone.
Thank you, Sheila. Happy to come and speak with you again anytime.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you subscribe to my show and rate it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else that you're listening. And make sure you follow me on social media. See you next time.